And it says one of the part of the ceremony is they stand up to their ankles in water. Seems really strange. And it talks earlier in the ceremony, they reveal the name over water. There's a strange ceremony taking place related to water. They're immersing in water and they're standing in water and they're... So what does this mean? So it says as follows. It says, the rabbi will then open his mouth after all this preparation in awe and say, "Blessed are you," and then he speaks the name. I look up the source. And you know what the source says, Michael? It's a source from around 1750 from a rabbi named Elijah of Vilna. Let me read you what it says. It's pretty cool. Now, he was actually, turns out, the rabbi of my ancestor, of my fifth great-grandfather. My great-great-great-great-grandfather was the #1 disciple of Elijah of Vilna. And what Elijah of Vilna, who's quoted in the encyclopedia as the source that the rabbis don't know the name, what he said was...
Okay, so this is a...
This is a rabbi in around 1750, and it's taken as well. The Jews don't know the name, Elijah of Vilna. And he was a brilliant... He's called the Vilna Gaon, which means the genius of Vilna. And if I can find you the source, I can read it to you. And give me a second here. I'm doing my little search here. 1 second. I have like dozens and dozens of sources on my laptop here. And okay, so he says the vowels of the name itself are hidden. Its vowels are the secret of the tetragrammaton. Okay, so we know that.
Okay.
Meaning the consonants of the tetragrammaton of the name Yud He Vav He, of the name of the Father, that's not even a question. They're Yud He Vav He. The vowels are the secret of the tetragrammaton, and he says the vowels of the name itself are hidden. So the modern 20th century encyclopedia written in Hebrew by rabbis say, well, the rabbis didn't know what the vowels were. Is that what he says?
No.
No, he says they're hidden.
Right.
He doesn't say he doesn't know what they are.
Doesn't say don't know how to pronounce it.
He's not saying I don't know how to pronounce it. He's saying this is hidden. We don't reveal this secret, which is a big difference. Now, so I mentioned before that.
So an encyclopedia is where people are getting their information from. The encyclopedia is incorrectly quoting the source.
Well, no, it's interpreting the source.
Interpreting the source.
And so what I do is I look up the source, and it doesn't say what they claim it says. Now, if that was all the information, you could argue back and forth. Did the rabbis know what the name was, or didn't they know what the name was, right? I mean, he's a rabbi who says it's hidden. Is it hidden to him, or is it just hidden to the public? So, and they transmitted it every 7 years. Surely there must be a trace of that somewhere in Jewish literature, that this ceremony continued of transmitting the name once every 7 years. So, while I was doing this research, I stumbled upon a reference to something called Sefer Hashem, the Book of the Divine Name. It's by a rabbi named Elazar Rokeach, who's known in English usually as Elazar of Worms. Worms is a city in Germany. And this rabbi wrote a book in the year 1225, the Book of the Divine Name. And the amazing thing about this is the book was never printed. And it wasn't printed until the year 2004. So this is a book that remained in handwritten manuscript form even after printing was invented, because it was considered so secret. And it wasn't until the 21st century that somebody decided to, break the secret. I mean, because printing's so easy today, right? Anybody with a desktop computer and literally a physical printer can print a book, and So someone in 2004, for the first time, printed a book from 1225. And so I heard about this Book of the Divine Name, and what it describes in it is the exact type of thing described in the Talmud, but 1,000 years later. A ceremony of transmitting the name.
1,000 years after...
1,000 years after Rabbi Bar Bar Chana saying, sages transmit the name to their disciples, we see how this was done by this rabbi in 1225. And what he describes is this elaborate ceremony. And in the elaborate ceremony, you have a rabbi and a disciple who go through a purification process. They fast, and they immerse themselves in a mikveh of water, and then they don white clothing, and then they do something a little bit strange at first until you read it in Hebrew. And by the way, it was printed for the first time in 2004, after nearly 800 years, and it's never been translated into English. In fact, the general public will hear this text for the first time ever in English. If I read you a little excerpt here, it's never been translated into English.
Okay, so here it is. It's going out to more than 127 countries around the world the first time, and here it is.
So it describes this ceremony. I won't read the whole thing because I want to get to some other things. But it talks about them fasting, and then it says the rabbi will, and it says one of the part of the ceremony is they stand up to their ankles in water. Seems really strange. And it talks earlier in the ceremony, they reveal the name over water. There's a strange ceremony taking place related to water. They're immersing in water and they're standing in water and they're... So what does this mean? So it says as follows. It says, the rabbi will then open his mouth after all this preparation in awe and say, blessed are you, and then he speaks the name. Yehovah, our God, King of the universe, Yehovah, God of Israel, you are one and your name is one. And Michael, you are one and your name is one. That's a reference to Zechariah 14, verse 9. Michael, you asked me the other day, we were discussing this beforehand. You asked me, so when was, one of the first times you became aware of the issue of the name? And one of the things I've shared in the past is Zechariah 14:9 was a verse that was burned into my heart early on. It's actually the closing verse of daily rabbinical prayers that I grew up with. And I got to be honest, Michael, the rabbis have daily prayers that I was expected to go to. Sometimes I only came at the end. I was bored during these prayers by rote, but I always loved that prayer at the end. And it's the verse in Zechariah 14:9, and I still remember it as the song I heard in the synagogue. Can I sing it for you?
Please do.
So in Hebrew, it's, and remember, in the synagogue, the tradition is don't speak the name Yehovah, speak it as Adonai. So that's how I remember it. Mm-hmm. But the verse was, Vahaya Adonai. This is the closing part of the entire long 45-minute prayer service, and on Shabbat, like more than 40, like a long prayer service. It'd be like 2 hours. Vahaya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu Yihyeh Adonai echad ushemo echad. And it shall come to pass that Yehovah will be king over the entire earth. And on that day, Yehovah will be one, and his name will be one. So that just gets into every fiber of your being when you hear this day after day, week after week. And I remember being there in the prayers thinking, what they just did for 45 minutes, I'm so bored. But this I connect to. The hope that one day Yehovah will be king over the entire earth, here on earth, not in some kind of mystical sense, but we'll have peace over the entire earth with Yehovah as our king, having defeated our enemies, bring peace to the world, and everyone will call on his name will be one. Everyone will call on his name. So that was early on, without even realizing I was being tied to the name, that just permeated my very soul. And that's the verse that the rabbi is referring to here when he makes the statement, blessed are you. And when he says it in the ceremony, he doesn't say, blessed are you, Adonai. He says, blessed are you, and he says the actual name, Yehovah. He says, blessed are you, our God, King of the universe, Yehovah, God of Israel. You are one, and your name is one. And he says, you commanded us to hide your great name. Where did he command that? That's in the oral tradition, right? And so as part of that tradition, we have to hide the name, but we're not blotting out the name, so we're transmitting it to our disciples. And I'll skip ahead here. He has a bunch of blessings, and then it says, the rabbi and his disciples shall place their eyes upon the water. And then they speak together in unison, the rabbi and his disciple, and they speak the name, and they speak the name by quoting a verse, Psalm 29:3. Now, 29:3 says, the voice, in the King James, the voice of the Lord is upon the waters. It's not a bad translation. It's the voice of Yehovah is upon the waters. But the way they understand the verse and the way they translate it, they're saying it in Hebrew, but the way they understand the verse, which is a valid way of understanding it, is the sound of Yehovah upon the water. And so at that moment, they both recite together the verse based on their interpretation, the sound of Yehovah upon the water. And at that moment, the rabbi has spoken it once by himself and a number of times by itself. The disciple heard it after this whole ceremony, and then they speak it together to make sure the disciple heard it correctly. And this is something that the rabbis were doing in 1225. So this idea that, the Jews might have known the name in ancient times, but because of the ban, they forgot it. That's not consistent with the Jewish sources. And remember, this is a source that most scholars don't know about. I found this buried in a series by a professor named Joseph Dan. He's one of the top scholars in the world in Judaic studies. He won the Israel Prize, which is the Jewish world's equivalent of the Nobel Prize, but for Jewish studies. I did an interview with him, and he wrote a 6,000-page series. It's like 12 volumes or something so far, and it's going to be more in the end. But so far, he's written 6,000 pages. On volume 6, page 561, he explains that this isn't just some theoretical thing. He says this is something Rabbi Elazar did. This is an actual ceremony that this rabbi participated in, donned white clothes and dressed, having immersed in water, and then he revealed the pronunciation of the name to his disciple. So what that tells you is we don't need to go to the Gnostic sources or pagan sources or Christian sources who didn't know Hebrew or Latin sources. We have rabbis who knew the name.
Shalom, Torah fans. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Tap the subscription button and the bell icon. And I promise to update weekly with in-depth biblical research. Be sure to download the new michaelrood.tv app for both mobile and home devices for even more commercial-free content.